Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we are going to look at some really fascinating global events
Yeah.
that are happening right now that are going to have huge impact in the coming weeks, months, years.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me how quickly things can change on the world stage, right?
Right.
Like, one day you're reading about a trade dispute and the next it's escalating into something much bigger, or, you have a fragile peace agreement that's hanging by a thread, and then suddenly there's a new development that could completely change the game.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here to try to make sense of it all,
Right.
right? To break down these complex events and see how they're all connected.
Yeah, and to kind of, connect the dots for our listeners so they can understand what's really going on and why it matters to them.
Exactly. And we've got a lot to cover today, everything from trade wars to potential ceasefires to even international justice. So let's just dive right in.
Okay, sounds good.
So first up, let's talk about the ongoing trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, yeah, that's been simmering for a while now.
Yeah, you remember back when the Trump administration slapped those tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And then Canada retaliated with their own tariffs? And it's kind of been this back and forth ever since.
Right, and it's, these tariffs are like these economic weapons that countries use to try to protect their own industries.
Right.
But they can often have these unintended consequences, like, they drive up prices for consumers.
Right.
And they can hurt businesses that rely on those imported goods.
And it gets so complicated because then other things get pulled in.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they're not just fighting about steel and aluminum anymore. Suddenly it's about electricity, too.
Yeah, that was an interesting development, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Premier of Ontario actually suspended that surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S.
Right. Right in the middle of these trade negotiations. It's like they're trying to use it as leverage,
Right?
Like, hey, we'll give you a break on electricity if you ease up on those steel tariffs.
Exactly. It's fascinating to see how these things all get intertwined.
Yeah, it really shows you how interconnected global trade is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do things stand now with these trade talks? Are they any closer to a resolution?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but there's a glimmer of hope,
Okay.
Both sides have agreed to suspend those additional tariffs that they were threatening to impose.
Okay, so that's good, right? At
Yeah.
least it's not escalating further.
Yeah, it's a sign that they're at least willing to talk and try to find some common ground.
Right, because I was reading that some experts were saying this could have spiraled into a full-blown trade war.
Oh, yeah. It definitely had the potential for that. But, diplomacy sometimes prevails.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
All right, so let's move on to a completely different part of the world, but one that's just as tense, and that's Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. The situation there is just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. It's been over a year now since Russia invaded, and there's still no end in sight.
And the human cost is just staggering,
So there's been some talk of a potential ceasefire agreement, a 30-day ceasefire between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Yeah, I saw that. But, ceasefires are tricky, especially in a conflict like this.
Right, because how do you actually enforce it, and what happens after those 30 days is up?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Because a ceasefire is not a peace treaty, it doesn't solve the underlying issues.
Exactly. It's just a pause in the fighting, a chance to maybe take a breath and see if there's any possibility for negotiations.
Right, and even then it's not guaranteed to hold, both sides have to agree to it and actually stick to the terms.
Yeah, and there's always the risk of spoilers, groups or individuals who don't want the ceasefire to succeed.
Right, and who might try to sabotage it.
Exactly.
So it's a really delicate situation, and it's hard to be optimistic, but I guess any chance for a reduction in violence is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Any opportunity to save lives and prevent further suffering is worth pursuing.
And speaking of things that could help Ukraine on the battlefield, the U.S. has also restored access to unclassified satellite imagery for them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so basically the U.S. is sharing real-time intelligence with Ukraine, which could give them a significant advantage.
Yeah. I mean, in modern warfare, information is everything, right?
Right. Knowing where your enemy is, what their movements are, that can be absolutely crucial.
And it could help Ukraine to better defend themselves and maybe even launch counteroffensives.
Right, and it's not just the U.S. that's stepping up their support. Finland just announced a pretty substantial military aid package for Ukraine.
Yeah, that was big news. 200 million euros worth of aid.
Which is a lot of money.
Yeah, and it includes some pretty heavy-duty equipment, too, like air defense systems and ammunition.
Right, and Finland, they've historically been neutral. They haven't really taken sides in these kinds of conflicts.
Right, but this aid package is a clear sign that they're siding with Ukraine and against Russia.
It's a pretty bold move considering they share a border with Russia.
Oh, absolutely. It shows how seriously they're taking this threat and how committed they are to supporting Ukraine.
And, it's not just Finland. Other countries are also sending aid and weapons to Ukraine.
Right, it's becoming this kind of proxy war, with the West arming Ukraine to fight against Russia.
And it's raising the stakes for everyone involved.
Yeah, because if Russia starts to lose ground, they might be tempted to escalate the conflict even further.
Which is a really scary thought.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation.
So amidst all of this fighting and tension, there have been some glimmers of hope for peace. Putin recently expressed his support for the ceasefire.
Yeah, I saw that, but with Putin, you always have to read between the lines.
Right, because he also said that there need to be further negotiations on specific conditions before the ceasefire can actually happen.
Exactly. So it's not a straightforward yes, it's more like a maybe, we'll see.
Right, and it could be a way for him to stall for time.
Oh, absolutely. He could be using it as a way to regroup his forces and prepare for a new offensive.
Or it could be a genuine attempt to find a peaceful solution.
It's hard to know for sure what his true intentions are.
I guess only time will tell.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how things unfold.
All right, so shifting gears now, let's talk about a completely different kind of global event, and that's the arrest of former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a huge development.
Yeah, the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of crimes against humanity.
Right, stemming from that brutal war on drugs that he waged while he was in office.
Yeah, thousands of people were killed extrajudicially as part of that campaign.
And the ICC is alleging that Duterte was responsible for these killings.
Right, that he either ordered them or condoned them.
And now he's going to have to face justice in The Hague.
It's a pretty landmark case.
Yeah.
It's not every day that a former head of state is arrested and charged with such serious crimes.
It sends a powerful message that no one is above the law.
And it could have a ripple effect on other leaders who might be tempted to commit similar atrocities.
Yeah, it shows that there are consequences for their actions.
And that the international community is watching. So it was a pretty dramatic arrest. They actually apprehended him in Manila and then immediately transferred him to The Hague.
Yeah, they didn't waste any time.
Which shows how seriously everyone is taking this case.
And it's a sign of the growing power and influence of the ICC.
And it's a reminder that international justice is a slow and often frustrating process, but it's still possible.
Yeah, it's a testament to the perseverance of the victims and their families who have been fighting for accountability for years.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground today, some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
But it's important to stay informed and engaged with what's happening in the world.
Right, because these events, they affect all of us in one way or another.
Absolutely. And even if it feels like there's not much we can do as individuals, it's still important to be aware and to have these conversations.
Yeah, and to think about what we can do in our own communities to promote peace and justice.
So I'm going to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the international community right now?
That's a great question.
Is it the threat of war, the rise of authoritarianism, the climate crisis?
It's hard to choose just one because they're all interconnected.
Right, and they all require global cooperation and solidarity to solve.
Yeah, and a willingness to put aside our differences and work together for the common good.
Easier said than done, but it's something we have to strive for.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for joining us for another deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.